All rise.
Good morning, everybody. Maybe firstly I should apologize for starting late. There were one or two glitches that we had to attend to before we start with today's proceedings. Advocate Maran, I'm made to understand that you're going to be the first one to kick off.
That is correct, Chairperson. Chairperson, Commissioner Musi, I'll start off with a Latin expression which goes as follows. Parturient montes nascitur ridiculus mus, which means the mountains will be in labor and an absurd mouse will be born. In simpler terms, Chairperson, it means all that work and nothing to show for it. About 12 years ago, I opened my closing address in a commission of inquiry in which I was involved with that Latin expression from Horace, attributed to that Roman poet and author Horace. I believe that those sentiments are even more appropriate to the labors of the critics and the whistleblowers in this commission under the leadership of the midwife-in-chief, Dr. Richard Young. These critics and whistleblowers have inundated this commission with a mountain of paper, books, and other documents. They have propagated theories and hypotheses, but have given very little by way of facts. Without laying any factual foundation, they have asked this commission to draw inferences from their theories and hypotheses. We shall respectfully submit that except where their evidence is confirmed by the evidence of the state actors and witnesses who gave evidence in this commission, their theories should not be accepted as having any credibility and validity. In this context, Chairperson, Commissioner, we are referring in particular to Ms. Patricia DeLille, Mr. Terry Crawford Brown, Dr. Gavin Woods, and Dr. Richard Young, and the last mentioned, who appears to have been the fonts at origo of most of the allegations of corruption and other impropriety that appear in 7 books and other publications. These allegations, Chairperson, Commissioner Musi, have a way of being recycled and reprocessed under different colors. Well, the interesting thing about Dr. Richard Young is that in transactions where he benefited as a successful bidder, he sees no corruption. He sees no irregularity. He sees no impropriety. These allegations of his have been trenchantly criticized, particularly in the submission of the Department of Defense. But what we found most disturbing, Chairperson, is that last Tuesday, 23rd of June, Dr. Young told a barefaced lie to the Commission that he had removed the offending references, in particular to the chairperson of this Commission and the coordinator, Mr. Mdumbe, from his website. That is not correct. If one visits that website today, you will still find those offensive remarks. He refers, Chairperson, to the chairperson and Mr. Mdumbe as unapologetic, barefaced liars. And he undertook, when he gave evidence, on the last day that he gave evidence, to remove those references from the website. And last week, he, with a straight face, told the Commission that he had done so, and he has not done so. And this is a person who wishes the Commission to accept his theories and his hypotheses. Chairperson, Commissioner Musi, we submit that this matter is about a government which went out of its way to ensure that the acquisition process is as transparent as possible and that it is executed in the most cost-effective way, resulting at some point in a surplus, even as payments were being made. And we submit that this acquisition process addresses the transformation challenges of a new constitutional dispensation that was based on the values of dignity, achievement of equality, advancement of human rights and freedoms, achievement of non-racialism, non-sexism, supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. Notwithstanding all the above, the government and the country became the target of a sustained and vicious attack over a period of more than 16 years. But fortunately, Chairperson, Commissioner Musi, we've come to realize through the rigorous, detailed, and far-reaching inquiry, where everyone, including the critics and the whistleblowers, were given every opportunity to place factual evidence before this Honorable Commission. We've come to realize that these attacks are malicious, they are spurious, and have no factual basis. We hope and trust that this Commission will finally bring this matter to an end, lifting the cloud of suspicion that has hovered over the country and the government for so long. We fully associate ourselves with the trenchant criticism of all these critics and whistleblowers made in the submission of the Department of Defense. Chairperson and Commissioner Musi, we commend our written submissions, our main and supplementary submissions to the Commission, and we shall speak to them. At the outset, we wish to summarize the terms of reference of the Commission, in particular, term of reference 1, 5, and 6. And that is with specific reference to the role of the members of the Interministerial Commission, Interministerial Committee, I beg your pardon. We believe the Commission's task, as far as the committee is concerned, is to establish the rationale for the SDPP, including the affordability of the SDP program, and secondly, to find out whether any person within or outside the government of the Republic of South Africa improperly influenced the award or conclusion of any of the SDPP contracts, and thirdly, to establish whether any of the contracts awarded in the SDPP is tainted by fraud or corruption, capable of proof, such as to justify its cancellation and the ramifications of such cancellation. Chairperson, I don't think it's necessary to have an overview of the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution that have a bearing on the role of the Interministerial Committee, save just to mention them, because they've been dealt with in numerous of the submissions. The most important, of course, being Section 85 of the Constitution, which deals with the President and the National Executive and their role in policy creation, policy formulation, policy implementation. And a great deal of what this Commission has heard deals with their functions as members of the National Executive. We submit that their mandate, constitutional mandate, is actually found in Section 85 of the Constitution, read in particular with Section 200 of the Constitution, which establishes the Defense Force. 200 subsection 1, the Defense Force must be structured and managed as a disciplined military force. 2, the primary object of the Defense Force is to defend and protect the Republic, its territorial integrity, and its people in accordance with the Constitution and the principles of international law regulating the use of force. We know, Chairperson, that some avowed pacifists like Mr. Terry Crawford Brown would rather there were no defense force and all the revenue of this country be spent on socio-economic development. But the instruction of the Constitution is that there has to be a defense force, and its primary object must be to defend and protect the people of the Republic. And this is the supreme law of the country. With regard to political responsibility, Section 201 states that, subsection 1, a member of the Cabinet must be responsible for defense. And 2, only the President, as head of the National Executive, may authorize the employment of the defense force in cooperation with the police service in defense of the Republic or in fulfillment of an international obligation. And Section 202 deals with the command of the defense force. Subsection 1, the President as head of the National Executive is Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Force and must appoint the military command of the Defense Force. Subsection 2, command of the Defense Force must be exercised in accordance with the directions of the Cabinet member responsible for defense under the authority of the President. Now, the policy framework relevant to the mandate and terms of reference of this Commission includes the white paper on defense that was developed by the new democratic government that assumed office in 1994, as well as the National Industrial Policy. At the time when these acquisitions were commenced, we all know that the president of the country was the late President Mandela. I know, Chairperson, that many of the critics and whistleblowers wish to divorce the late President Mandela from the acquisition process. But the fact of the matter and the uncontradicted evidence is that this happened under his watch. He went to Parliament, and at the opening of Parliament, State of the Nation address on the 7th of February 1997, he stated the following: debate will continue this year on the white paper and the defense review, but what is critical is to move towards practical implementation. One of the issues in this regard is the Defense Forces requirements for equipment. The question here is not whether, but how these requirements and how much the country can afford. As Commander-in-Chief, I wish to emphasize that we shall not shirk our responsibility to the Defense Force. The quotation here, Chairperson, is from paragraph 46.1 of the written submission by Minister Trevor Manuel, which is before the Commission. The members, and this is common cause, of the Interministerial Committee were Deputy President and later President Mbeki, who was chairperson of the committee, Minister of Finance, Mr. Trevor Manuel, Minister of Defense, the late Mr. Joe Modise, and later Minister Musiwa Likota, Minister of Public Enterprises, Mr. Stella Sigao, and later Minister Jeff Radebe. Incidentally, Chairperson, there's not been a single allegation made against Minister Jeff Radebe. But from 17th of June 1999, he was a member of that committee, which in December decided that the contracts should be signed. And Ms. Stella Sigao at that time was no longer a member of the Interministerial Committee, as she was then Minister of Public Works. Deputy Minister Casrels, who gave evidence before the Commission, was not a member of Cabinet because he was a deputy minister and attended deliberations of the Interministerial Committee by invitation. And the last member of this committee that I have not mentioned was Mr. Alec Irwin, who gave uncontradicted evidence before this commission. But now, interesting thing, Chairperson, is that some of the critics wish to attack the evidence of Mr. Alec Irwin when they were given more than ample opportunity to come and contradict that evidence, and they did not. Unfortunately, some of the criticism also emanates from some of the submissions by the evidence leaders. But let's say at the outset that one cannot contradict credible evidence given under oath by other evidence, which is hearsay, which is theories and hypotheses, particularly without putting those matters on which a contradiction is sought to the witness to react to such allegations. Chairperson and Commissioner Musi, we commend to the Commission the testimony of Mr. Alec Irwin and his written submission, particularly at paragraph 25 of his written submission. I think it's important to read this out to refresh our memories. Mr. Irwin expressed himself in the following terms: the evolving policy framework of the mid to late 1990s was informed by the public hearings that form part of the consultation process, the addresses by Minister and the Presidency on pertinent issues of the SDPP and related records. Finally, the mechanism for implementing the SDPP was developed in the 1996 White Paper on Defense, the Defense Review of 1998, the National Industrial Participation Program and its operating guidelines, the NIP, and related policy documents. We submit, Chairperson, Commissioner Musi, that though each member of the Ministerial Committee dealt with his or her particular area of responsibility in terms of the executive functions assigned to that particular member, the decisions taken and recommendations made represented the collective wisdom of the IMC members. And it bears pointing out that in presenting their evidence, the members of the IMC sought to make it clear that they were constituted as a subcommittee of cabinet. As such, they understood that they were tasked with taking charge of a project that was of strategic value to South Africa, in that it was recognized that the reach of the SDPP had to extend beyond the Department of Defense to encompass trade and enterprise development and advantage the country as a whole. They were also guided by the values and principles of the Constitution, in particular the founding values and the supremacy of the Constitution, to which I have referred at the opening of my address, read with the provisions of Chapter 11, to which I have also referred. And that the committee were duly authorized to focus on the objectives that the National Executive sought to achieve with this strategic defense acquisition. The committee called for reports, including affordability reports, because there were more than one, and reports from officials. And they used their collective expertise and wisdom to consider the reports that they had received and incorporated these in recommendations that they made to Cabinet. And they presented the Cabinet with reports on the SDPP as and when appropriate. They also made recommendations to Cabinet on the available options for the procurement of this equipment. And on the 18th of November 1998 and the 25th of November 1999, they participated in the taking of the final decisions by Cabinet. What is of significance, Chair and Commissioner Musi, is that the process between November 1998 and 1999 was a long and thorough process where they interrogated in particular the cost options and the affordability. And finally, Cabinet decided that the way in which the procurement was to be implemented satisfied the strictures of the Constitution, and the packages were affordable. And in essence, Chairperson, what these submissions traverse is the material that was placed before the Commission for purposes of fulfilling its mandate. And in particular, to establish whether there is any merit in the allegations of fraud, corruption, impropriety, and irregularity that have over the years been leveled by critics of the SDPP. And we submit that the members of the IMC have understood that the task of this commission extends to making findings, reporting, and making recommendations to the President on the matters that they were charged to investigate. One matter, Chairperson and Commissioner Musi, that we wish to emphasize is that throughout their evidence before this commission, all the members of the Ministerial Committee, including former President Mbeki, were trying their best to assist this commission in its task. They did not have to be dragged here, they did not have to be subpoenaed, they came voluntarily. In spite of the fact that many of them had not been in cabinet for some 7 years, 6 to 7 years, but they voluntarily came to assist the Commission. We submit on behalf of the members of the IMC unequivocally that there has been no evidence of wrongdoing on the part of any of them or in relation to their collective functions. And as Minister Manuel has said, and I quote, "The IMC has always maintained that as a subcommittee of Cabinet, it acted within the framework of the law. The court challenges to the 18th November 1998 decision of the Cabinet to procure defense armaments under the SDPP, which have been adjudicated to finality by our courts, have found no merit in the complaints lodged in those court proceedings. This is essentially due to the fact that the executive decisions taken were in accordance with the prescripts of the law and the Constitution in particular. That is found in the written submission of Minister Manuel at paragraph 20. The Commission was furnished with evidence of those court matters. The applicant having been Mr. Terry Crawford Brown, who applied for the cancellation of the contracts on various bases. He lost in the Western Cape High Court. He applied for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Leave was refused. He applied to appeal to the Constitutional Court. Leave was refused. We submit, Chairperson, that the decision of Cabinet to procure these armaments was rational, and the process adopted in arriving at the decision were authorized, and they were thorough, and they pass constitutional muster. And our submissions are anchored in the testimony of various witnesses, including the critics of the SDP. And not one of those critics was able to produce evidence as contrasted with theories and hypotheses of fraud, corruption, impropriety, or irregularity in the decision-making process. Commission will bear with me. In its final submission, the Ministerial Committee relies on the following evidence. The written statements and the submissions, including the final submissions, and the evidence of, firstly, Mr. Alec Irwin, Deputy Minister Ronnie Casserols, Minister Musiwa Likota, Minister Trevor Manuel, President Thabo Mbeki, the National Treasury officials, including the final submission by Advocate Brainders, SC, Department of Defense officials, including the final submission of Advocate Kane, SC, the Arms Corps officials, the DTI officials, including the final submission by Mr. Choe, the final submission of the evidence leaders, Ms. Ramachaka and Advocate Mpacha, SC, and paragraphs 94 to 103 of the final submission of Advocate Sibeko, SC, and Advocate Sillo. And we say that so that we don't have to repeat their submissions. They are all in line and form the basis of not only the evidence that was given on behalf of the IMC, but also the submissions that we are making. As I've already stated, Chairperson, the submission that we advance insofar as the critics of the program are concerned, they tendered evidence that was based on allegations, suspicions, theories, probabilities of impropriety and corruption. In the nature of commission of inquiry, which is a fact-finding exercise, it's facts, not conjecture, is what is required. As I've already indicated, Chairperson Commissioner Musi, on the 18th of November 1998, the Cabinet took a decision to procure the packages. This was an in-principle decision in that Cabinet required further interrogation of the cost and in particular the risk elements of this acquisition. Minister Manuel was tasked with, among other things, looking into the most practical, efficient, and affordable method of servicing the financial obligations that were anticipated. And as we've already submitted, on the 25th of November 1999, unfortunately in our submission it reflects 1998. It was 1999. And after an affordability review had been undertaken and negotiations with identified suppliers embarked upon, the SDPP was finally approved. And in giving context to the collective decision-making functions of Cabinet, President Mbeki explained the following in his testimony before the Commission: that Cabinet is the senior committee that considers information placed before it and takes final decisions, and that Cabinet received reports from the Ministerial Committee in the same manner as it would normally receive reports and recommendations from particular ministers and therefore take a final decision on the matter tabled in Cabinet. These standard processes of Cabinet did not change during Cabinet's consideration of the defense packages. In the result, Cabinet's collective wisdom was applied to the final decision to purchase the various items of equipment that make up the packages. And with regard to the nature of the executive decision-making and the role of Cabinet, we refer this Honourable Commission to the submission of Minister Alec Irwin, particularly paragraphs 3, 6, and 14. And with regard to the NIPS, we also refer this Honourable Commission to Minister Irwin's evidence as it's found in the transcript from pages 4364 to 4393, 4395, 4403, and 4406. With regard to the decision that was taken on the 18th of November, 1998, we respectfully refer this Commission to the written submission of Minister Trevor Manuel, paragraph 10, and with regard to the decision taken on the 25th of November 1999, the same submission by Mr. Trevor Manuel, footnote 5 on page 23. And with regard to the final decision that was taken on the 1st of December 1999, we refer the Commission to the written submission of President Mbeki, paragraph 10. With regard to the rationale, we have elected to make submissions using the evidence of President Mbeki as chairperson of the IMC. The views articulated by him are similar to those expressed by other members of the IMC. We use President Mbeki as a focal point and in an effort to avoid prolixity and repetitiveness. And where apposite, we illustrate the points made by President Mbeki by referring to the evidence of his cabinet colleagues. And the major issues that comprise the material traversed under the question of the rationale are firstly, how the Cabinet arrived at the decision to extend the purchase of the defense equipment beyond the purchase of the corvettes. It is common cause that the purchase of the corvettes for the Navy had been considered by the pre-democratic government structures, such as the State Tender Board, that were charged at the time with the purchase of such equipment. We also consider socio-economic and developmental objectives that informed and influenced the taking of the decision to acquire these weapons. The affordability of the packages and the risk analysis that was undertaken to ensure that the procurement of the identified defense equipment would be affordable. And whether or not once the decision on the packages was made, the expenditure framework of government prejudiced the delivery of services such as education and healthcare because government spending was skewed, as was alleged by the critics, in favor of defense. We also consider the strategic nature of the program, and we submit that this program was actually informed in part by the developmental objectives of the government. This becomes evident in the testimony presented on how the packages could be used to move away from the pre-94 government's industrial development policies that were focused on separate development. We submit that there was a constitutional imperative to equip the defense force in a manner consonant with the functions and obligations with which it was charged under the Constitution. Chairperson and Commissioner Musi, I think the question of the rationale is well dealt with and comprehensively dealt with in the submission by the DOD, where they set out the basis for the acquisition. The main thesis being that the equipment that the defense force as a whole had at the time had become obsolete, and other equipment was becoming obsolescent, and it needed to be replaced. And that submission deals with each of the acquisitions, and we are not going to repeat it here, but we ask that be incorporated in our submission. But what we do need to emphasize is that Minister Castrold and President Mbeki were sensitive to the fact that the new democratic government had to reposition the National Defense Force in the eyes of the people of the country. In essence, the government had to ensure that the National Defense Force had the necessary capability and functionality to discharge its constitutionally mandated functions. President Mbeki, Minister Irwin, and Minister Manuel gave further context with respect to the rationale in their testimony on the imperative to address the socio-economic rights that the Constitution expected government to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill, and in so doing, assist the majority of the population to realize. Mr. Irwin, in particular, referred to the socio-economic objectives that were informed by the need to attract foreign direct investment and to create jobs. He clearly stated that he understood, as the executive authority of the Department of Trade and Industry, the imperative of leveraging the opportunities created by the government's procurement program to sustain South Africa's economic growth, leverage foreign direct investment, create jobs, and so forth. Put differently, and we're quoting from his written submission, the focus of our industrial participation policy was on finding and creating opportunities for economic growth and development at a broad societal level, and the SDPP, being the largest procurement process government had ever undertaken, seemed to present the appropriate opportunity to put government's industrial policy imperatives and strategies to the test. This is found at paragraph 42 of Minister Irwin's written submission, and also paragraph 70 of that submission, where he supports his views by explaining that, and I quote, "In a situation where available funds were scarce to support industrial policy, the application of the NIPP to the SDPP made eminent sense." So, in the context, Mr. Irwin testified on the policy-related purposes of the non-defense packages of the SDPP in the context of the National Industrial Policy and the National Industrial Participation Program. In his testimony, he also touched on the benefits that were realized and the challenges that the NIP presented in the implementation of the SDPP. Now, dealing with affordability, Minister Manuel pointed to the balance that was attained in ensuring that regardless of the decision to sign the SDPP, service delivery by government departments remained optimal. And one has to marry this with the evidence of President Mbeki, who said that at no stage did the IMC take any decision without reference to cost. President Mbeki also confirmed under cross-examination that the affordability report was discussed by the Ministerial Committee and by Cabinet, and Cabinet accepted the report. And to a large extent, this evidence is supported and finds resonance with the written submission of Mr. Andrew Donaldson under the heading, "The Cost to Budget of the Procurement Decision," and in particular, paragraph 76 thereof, which Minister Manuel supported at paragraph 63 of his written submission. And this is also referred to in the evidence, Chairperson, Commissioner, pages 7188, 7189, 7201, 7203, and also in the evidence of President Mbeki, 7303 to 7304, where President Mbeki pointed out that government, in fact, reduced quite sharply expenditure on defense. And in this connection, Chairperson and Commissioner, with regard to whether or not the expenditure framework of government prejudiced the delivery of services, we submit that the evidence of National Treasury, of Minister Manuel, and President Mbeki is a complete answer to that issue. And also the concluding remarks in paragraph 32 of our submissions, that the Interministerial Committee and Cabinet did not ignore anything. In other words, they took everything into account, including cost and affordability. So, in conclusion on this topic, we submit, Chairperson, Commissioner, that as a very sound rationale for these purchases, and the SDPP pass constitutional muster. Now, coming to the next topic of alleged wrongdoing or irregularity, we submit that we have not been able to find any material in the evidence before the Commission that supports the allegations made by certain critics of the SDPP. The members of the IMC who presented evidence before this Commission responded to the allegations that were brought to their attention. They dealt with these allegations, in particular those relating to the reasons for the defense review process and the decision to broaden the procurement of defense equipment beyond the purchase of corvettes. The criticism relating to the NIPS was also ventilated and responded to by the DTI and Minister Irwin. In this regard, Chairperson, I wish to refer to the transcript evidence of Minister Irwin. The relevant pages are 4364, 4367, 4369, up to 4372, and further from 4373 to 4378, and dealing with the subject of credits, 4387 up to 4388. President Mbeki was cross-examined at length about matters relating to the recommendations of the IMC and the decisions of Cabinet. He was also asked about corruption and bribes being paid to certain parties who were involved in the SDPP. He responded fully to those questions, stating, amongst other things, and I quote, "I'm not aware of any single fact that has been produced by anybody to say the Interministerial Committee took any decision in a corrupt manner, that the Cabinet took any decision in a corrupt manner. I'm not aware of this. That at the process of determining, for instance, the preferred bidders, that decision was influenced by corrupt interventions." And this is to be found at page 7490 of the transcript, and also page 7461. None of the witnesses who had made these allegations were able to support any of them with facts. In fact, Ms. Delil, Dr. Young, Dr. Woods, Colonel Duploy, and General Meering were those who categorically stated that they had no factual evidence of wrongdoing on the part of any member of the IMC. I think it's illuminating to refer to the evidence of Dr. Young, and this is found at page 10622 to 10628. Now, Chairperson, dealing with one allegation by Mr. Young, Dr. Young, I beg your pardon, relating to the alleged meeting by former President Mbeki with the French. That evidence is found on those pages to which I've mentioned. He says in his final submission that it is common cause that such a meeting took place. That is wrong. It is not common cause. The Commission will recall President Mbeki's evidence on this matter. And that evidence is to be found at pages 7494 to 7495, where he states, I'll summarize that evidence, that he has no recollection of such a meeting. He has tried to find out from people who might have had knowledge about this meeting whether it in fact took place. A meeting was arranged by the then ambassador, Ambassador Barbara Masekela. She would not have attended that meeting. He was in France with former Minister Essop Pahad. He inquired from him. Minister Essop Pahad had no recollection of such a meeting. Because President Mbeki was a guest of the government of France, he also inquired from the French, who in any event would have facilitated such a meeting, whether such a meeting actually took place. He drew a blank there. So it is not common cause that such a meeting took place. And the allegation that Dr. Young wishes to urge upon this Commission relating to that meeting is that President Mbeki gave an assurance to the French that the deal was theirs. That evidence is generally denied by President Mbeki. Obviously, that allegation was not put to him when he was before the Commission. The only allegation that was put to him was whether, in fact, he had any recollection of meeting the French. So it can be taken, Chairperson, that there is a denial on oath of such an assurance given to the French. And what do we have to counter that evidence? Hearsay evidence from an unknown source, a document whose provenance has not been established, a witness who refuses to disclose the source of that information. And when one contrasts that hearsay evidence from a shady source, I'll call him a shady source, like Dr. Young, one cannot with any conviction find that allegation, that hearsay allegation, to be true. There's also an allegation in the same connection that Mr. Yusuf Surti was an interlocutor of President Mbeki In fact, even that allegation is confused because at some part of that story, the person who was said to be close to Mr. Sorti was the late President Mandela. But President Mbeki was supposed to be operating through Mr. Yusuf Sorti. There is absolutely no evidence relating to such a relationship between Mr. Sorti and President Mbeki. And this evidence of Dr. Young, Chairperson Commissioner Musi, to be found on page 9722 to 9747. So, Chairperson, it is our submission that these scurrilous allegations should now finally be put to rest. Yes. In fact, it is called that when the witness Patricia DeLille gave her evidence after bringing these allegations into the public space via the so-called DeLille dossier, which, strangely enough, was condemned by a fellow critic and whistleblower as bizarre and lacking in substance. It's the evidence of Mr. Terry Crawford Brown. Yeah. And she finally conceded that she had no personal or direct evidence of any wrongfulness, corruption, or unlawfulness. She was relying on this so-called bizarre document which lacked substance to make these allegations. And of course, that document spawned a cottage industry of such allegations and was the basis of some books which have been written about this. And when the people who make these allegations are invited to come and give evidence, they conveniently hide out of jurisdiction. And the one who was within jurisdiction flatly refused to give evidence on some specious and unsupportable grounds.
Suppose those meetings did in fact take place between former President Mbeki and the French. Suppose it did take place and the assurances were given. How do you reconcile that with how the French company, Thomson, came into the SDPP? We know they were not the original bidders, winners of the bidders. They came in through ADS. They purchased a share into ADS, and that's how they came into the process, apparently through their own ingenuity. How do you reconcile that with the possibility of that meeting having taken place and assurance having been given?
We submit, Commissioner Musi, that it doesn't make sense. That there's no linkage. And I think it can be dismissed out of hand.
Just from my side, whilst you're still dealing with that issue, can I just ask you something? During the closing submissions, Dr. Young, I asked him the question And the question was, if we must make a recommendation that somebody must be charged, who is that person? Dr. Young replied and said that, on the available evidence, you can't make a recommendation that anybody should be charged. But then he went further and said that he thinks that this commission should recommend that there should be another investigation. Do you want to comment on that?
Chairperson, there was a far-reaching commission that was appointed to investigate these very issues, headed by the former public protector, who is now Justice Selby Bakwa, Auditor General, Mr. Shauket Faki, and a representative of the National Director of Public Prosecutions. That commission, incidentally, Chairperson, you've reminded me of an issue. Dr. Young gave evidence at that commission. And before he could complete the evidence and before he could cross-examine Admiral Kammerman, he ran away. He left that commission. And there was a sequel to that because an article appeared in one of the Afrikaans newspapers which attributed cowardice to Dr. Young. And he sued the public protector for damages. And of course, he lost that case and he was ordered to pay the cost of 2 counsel. But the point I'm making, Chairperson, is that that was the one investigation which found no wrongdoing on the part of government, particularly the cabinet and the IMC. This commission has been even more thorough than the one that was held some 14 years ago. Has looked at every angle, every aspect, given everybody an opportunity of coming forward to give evidence. And the Commission will be writing its report in the next couple of months. For the life of me, I do not see what any other investigation will achieve, what purpose will be served by a further investigation, particularly in the light of the evidence of Dr. Young himself, where he says, I can't say who, I can't actually suggest who should be charged. And of course, saying that the contracts that he received must not be cancelled because they were not attended by any fraud and irregularity. But of course, Dr. Young has demonstrated the type of person that he is before this commission. And his evidence, I'm afraid, should be rejected. Thank you. That's my response, Chairperson. Now, at a very late stage, Dr. Young also made allegations against former and late Minister Sigao. Now, and this related to allegations that her daughter had received assistance from one of the successful bidders. Mrs. Gao was Minister of Public Enterprises. As such, she had indirect oversight over application of the NIPS, the DIPS and the NIPS. Direct oversight fell within the DTI's jurisdiction. In any event, for her to have had any undue and improper impact on which primary contractors would be appointed, she would have had to influence all her colleagues in the IMC and cabinet, and there's no evidence of such influence. And her tenure, in any event, on the IMC ended in May 1999, because in the new cabinet, which took office from about 16th, 17th of June 1999, she was appointed Minister of Public Works, and she was no longer in the IMC. So she did not take part, for instance, in the decisions that were taken on the 25th of November 1999 and the decisions that were taken on the 1st of December 1999. Except as part of a large collective, a cabinet member, certainly not part of the IMC. Yeah. So we submit, Chairperson, that there is no evidence of any improper influence by Minister Sikau, particularly when this allegation comes at a very, very late stage, when all the witnesses who could have dealt with it have given their evidence, and when Ms. Gao herself had passed on for 9 years. And finally, Chairperson and Commissioner, I refer to some floating allegations with regard to Mr. Joe Modise. Well, the ministerial committee, firstly, was not concerned with any subcontracts. There is no satisfactory evidence that the late Minister Joe Modise was involved in any corruption or receipt of money or bribes. This matter was dealt with last week when the issue was raised and when reference was given to the evidence that was given under cross-examination by Minister Joe Modise's daughter, where I believe it was Dr. Gavin Woods who had to retract the spurious allegations that were made. In any event, he was also dealing with evidence obtained from very shady and dubious sources. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of it all, after all the evidence had been heard, after the cross-examination had been given, those allegations we submit have found no traction at all.
Advocate Meran, if I recall, I think Dr. Wood ended up withdrawing that allegation that Mr. Modise received a bribe. He ended up reducing it to a benefit. He ended up saying that in actual fact he received the benefit. He no longer called it a bribe. So although, he did not give us evidence about the nature of the bribe, of the benefit and how he received that benefit. I don't think that, he stuck to his version that he received a bribe. End up saying it was a benefit.
That is perfectly correct, Chairperson. In fact, when he started with his evidence, he said Mr. Modise had received money. And he ended up retracting that, even that particular allegation, said no. He did not receive money. He didn't receive a bribe. He received a benefit, the nature of which, as Honourable Commissioner correctly says, was not characterized. It was not described. So I think there's absolutely no basis even for that finding.
The allegation that BAE assisted her daughter, is it disputed? The allegation that BAE assisted her daughter in the UK, is it disputed?
Chairperson, the fact is that we do not know. Commissioner Musi will recall that this evidence came through Dr. Young when all the witnesses representing the IMC had given their evidence. In the short time that was available to us, we were not able to investigate that because, amongst other things, Minister Sekau is late, and we're not able to establish whether that is true or not. But based on the source of that allegation, in other words, Dr. Young, who receives the information from some other undisclosed source, the source that he is not prepared to disclose to this commission, and the credibility of Dr. Young, and the question of improper influence, which is really the important issue relating to this evidence. We say there is no evidence to confidently say that there was any improper influence, because that is the end point. That is the end point of.
Backed up his allegation by producing correspondence to that effect. What do we make of that?
Chairperson, our submission is that even that correspondence was not proved. They were just documents which in our submission, whose provenance has really not been established. And even if there was such assistance, one has to go further and establish that Ms. Stella Sekau improperly influenced the acquisition of these arms. In other words, IMC, up to the time when she was a member, and later, when she was no longer a member but still a member of cabinet, that she also influenced cabinet. I don't think that finding can be arrived at. And that is the cardinal finding that the Commission is called upon to find.
Yes, that was what was bothering me. What do we make of this allegation? Suppose it is true. What do we make of it? How does it impact on the decision? There's no evidence that the favors done to her had an impact on a decision to award the contracts. That is the issue.
That is correct, Commissioner Musi. It doesn't follow as a matter of logic, that if in fact she did receive a benefit for a child, that she influenced the acquisition, particularly an acquisition which went through so many hoops, which had so many checks and balances within it, so many people involved, so many committees through which it went. I don't think even by way of inferential reasoning that conclusion can be arrived at. Yes, I don't think it's important. Yes. Therefore, we conclude, Chairperson and Commissioner Musi, that the inquiry by this Commission has been wide-ranging and thorough, that interested parties who sought to assist the Commission were given a full and adequate opportunity to do so. Members of the IMC who appeared voluntarily did so in an effort to assist the Commission in discharging its mandate. The evidence leaders of the Commission assisted in the preparation of submissions and led their evidence. Other than Minister Irwin, the members of the IMC were cross-examined on the role they played both individually and collectively as members of Cabinet as it was then constituted. They were able to shed light on the decision-making processes of Cabinet and on how Cabinet arrived at the particular decisions that related to the packages. We submit that on a conspectus of all the admitted and admissible evidence, oral and documentary, it's been conclusively demonstrated that there was a sound and constitutionally compliant rationale for the packages and that the packages were affordable. Furthermore, we submit that there's no evidence that any person within or outside government improperly influenced the award or conclusion of any of the packages. Hence, we submit that the question of their cancellation does not arise. We also submit that the decisions taken by Cabinet were consistent with the obligations of government as set out in the Constitution. In particular, the IMC and Cabinet sought to comply fully with the injunction in Section 200, subsection 2 of the Constitution, to which reference has been made. And we also recognize that the Commission is conscious of the fact that this is not the first probe into the packages. We submit that none of the other probes or court proceedings have found merit in the allegations that the decisions taken by Cabinet on the packages were not rational. There's no gainsaying that the decisions of Cabinet were strategic in nature and were policy-laden. And one of the functions of the National Executive as set out in Section 85 of the Constitution is to develop and implement national policy, including defense policy. And in the result and in the absence of any evidence of malfeasance on their part, we submit that there can be no finding of impropriety, irregularity, fraud, or corruption by members of the Ministerial Committee or Cabinet that was headed by President Mandela at the time that the decisions on the SDPP were made. Chairperson, Commissioner Musi, those are our submissions.
Thanks a lot, Advocate Moirani. I think your submissions will help us a great deal when we prepare our report. Thank you for the submissions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Musi.
I'm not sure what is the pecking order like.
Mr. Chair, subject to your view, the arrangement, as I understand it, is that I will follow at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry, how long do you think you're going to be? Just rough estimation.
my estimate is 30 to 40 minutes, Mr. Chair.
Can we then maybe take the tea adjournment
As
now?
you please.
Then we'll come back at 12:20.
If it suits you, yes.
Thank you. We'll now adjourn.
Chairperson, can we be excused? Can we be excused, Chairperson?
Thank you. You are excused. I think this marks the end of your participation in this commission.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for participating.
uma bangasheshi labantu bazoza bahambe because in a visual value. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Thomas, they want to come to us, eh? Sharp.
Speaking to him through that mic.
And this one. Yeah?
We told you the light.
Yeah, it was patched.
Okay. Yeah, but the lady in the visual bed.
Yeah, basaphe kanje.
Then you go now the
Yeah. Abana maba delay, so you lose the visual value. Sizomela bo.
Yeah.
Oh no. Hi. Okay, thanks. All right, I'm stand by. Minute from now. The camera mic must be off. Unplug channel 2. It's unplugged. The camera mic is off. All right, Lakshmi. Yeah. Hello? I can't hear you now. Ngiminyana sona.